Welcome back, everyone, to Astral Doorway. This is Gene. On this episode, I'll be sharing quite a special experience that I had recently. You may recall in the first episode, I talked about teaching a class in the Astral. Well, in this experience that I'm going to share, I attended one. Now, I suspect that Astral Classes in general are more common than we realize, and that almost everyone unconsciously attends these classes in their sleep. Now, that's just a speculation, of course, but for me, it's something that I've noticed is a common theme in the Astral. Kendra K asked, how does this happen? How do people get to these classes unconsciously? Well, my honest answer is I don't know, but I suspect there are beings or people who devote themselves to helping humanity and that they're responsible for organizing these classes and bringing people there for the purpose of humanity's spiritual growth, even if those people don't remember the experiences. You know, there does seem to be some sort of subconscious learning going on in these classes, which surely affects people's conscious minds in some way. Now, when I taught that class that I mentioned in the first video, I didn't know how it happened. I didn't organize it. I was just in front of a room with a lot of people, and I was looking into this classroom, and I just knew that this is what I had to do. I had to go in and teach these people, and I gave a lesson on astral projection. I didn't question it. I just completely went with it as if a part of me had already agreed to it. So yeah. Now, in this experience I'm going to share, I walked into a class in the middle of the lesson, and as far as I was aware, I was the only conscious participant there, apart from the teacher, of course. So, this happened in the very early hours of the morning. I had a series of dreams beforehand and another astral projection, which involved me shapeshifting into a cat for the first time. After that, I returned to my physical body, and then I proceeded to get back up out of my physical body, and I proceeded to leave my apartment here in London. I enjoyed a peaceful stroll on the streets of London for a bit in the astral. I live quite near the city centre, so it's always interesting to see what's going on around here. Everything was exactly the same as it was in the physical. At one point, I did start to lose awareness. As I said, I had already had other experiences before this, so perhaps I was losing stamina a bit. So I sat down, cross-legged on the pavement, and I meditated. I got into a zen-like state and focused on the rustling of the trees nearby, looked at the blue sky, and just appreciated where I was. I got some weird looks from people passing by, but at this point, my awareness was coming back. You could say the experience was becoming hyper-realistic when it just feels more real than the physical. When you feel the sun on your skin and you look at the details of a wall or a fence or the pavement that I was looking at, experiences can become super real like this. I wish I was an artist and I could articulate how real the experience was and how experiences like this in the astral can be. I got back up and I carried on walking on the familiar streets that I always walk on in the physical. There weren't many surprises because everything was identical. However, I then noticed, as I came across this familiar street, something very different. In the physical, there's this roundabout in the middle of a busy street, which has some grass and trees and benches on it. It's like a mini park with cars that are always driving around it. Now, in the astral, in this experience, instead of seeing that usual roundabout, I saw this huge, white, majestic church/temple. It was beautiful, immaculate and tall. Now, opposite this roundabout, there's usually a Christian church. So I looked over at that thinking maybe it's just the same church, but transformed and in the wrong location. But nope, that regular church was still there. And frankly, it looked meek in comparison to this magnificent temple. So I was a little confused and curious. I just had to go inside. So I crossed the road and walked up these many steps to get to this huge wooden doorway. An astral doorway, so to speak. Excuse the pun. Now, I opened the door and I was a little surprised to see there was a sort of sermon going on, a mass, at least I thought. It was filled with around 100 people sat inside. Now, personally, being raised Catholic and someone who enjoys Gnostic teachings, I'm open to all religions, so I didn't mind joining. I'll be honest, I just expected this to be a regular Christian or Catholic mass or something. So I went inside and sat down on the back row next to this Indian fellow who gave me a polite nod. Even though the temple was majestic on the outside, it was surprisingly quite basic and humble on the inside. It had massive pillars on either row, with the usual long wooden benches you see in most churches, with the stage at the end. And on the stage was a woman. Now I'll call her the priestess, which is fitting since this was taking place in a temple and she was leading this sort of class. She was sitting down behind a standard school-looking desk on a very basic chair. Now, what really caught my attention and piqued my interest was that she was wearing a robe which was white and silver. Now, something I've not shared yet is that I used to be part of a Gnostic group for some years where we learned about various esoteric things. And one of those things that my teacher at the time revealed to me was that it's common for spiritual masters in the astral plane to wear silver and white robes. And that's one way you can identify whether a teacher is of pure and good intention. And similarly, just to let you all know, if you see someone wearing black and red robes, then they're supposed to usually be from a darker background and they probably practice things which are of a more negative nature. So, as I looked at her, we made eye contact even though I was at the back of the building. Telepathically, she welcomed me and said hello, and she recognized me as being conscious compared to everyone else in the church. Now, this sort of communication in the astral is a sort of norm over there. It's not unusual to communicate information to others in this way. So, yeah, I liked this priestess. She seemed powerful and wise. I had an immediate sense of admiration for her. She smiled at me, I smiled back, and she kindly communicated that this was a sort of basic public teaching and that everyone here was asleep. Asleep in the sense that their consciousness was asleep. She basically said that I didn't really need to be there, but I was welcome. Of course, I wanted to stay. I was very interested in how all of this worked. I was very curious. The idea of people leaving the body unconsciously at night has been playing on my mind for a while, so this was the perfect opportunity to observe what people are like in these states. I also noticed that while me and the priestess were looking at each other and communicating telepathically, I could tell that at the same time, she was still talking to other people as if she were multitasking on some level that's incomprehensible to me, to be honest. So she was clearly a skilled being. I'm reminded of Hindu gods who are depicted with many heads, because that is basically what I saw, like the picture you can see on the screen. So I tried to pay attention to what she was teaching. I heard people asking questions about God and the priestess quoting verses from the Quran and the Bible, but I was more interested in the people. Everyone looked, should I say, too happy. It was almost a bit creepy, actually, like they were overly fascinated with the class. It was strange, a strange energy. It's like when people get too immersed with a TV show and they forget themselves. And as I was looking at everyone, a group of about 5 people from the middle row were looking at me, smiling, and invited me to sit next to them. A part of me recognized them, but I didn't really know who they were on the level of my usual physical mind. They clearly knew who I was, though. So I was a little confused, but I just got up anyway and sat next to them. They were super friendly, smiley, and welcoming. There was a real sense of friendship and that I knew them. It was nice, but a little strange too, but I just carried on anyway. Perhaps I've unconsciously attended classes with these people before. Who knows? Anyway, after the priestess had finished speaking for some time, she came down from the stage and she proceeded to ask everyone to get out their masks, which they must have made towards the beginning of the class. Now, I looked on in wonder at everyone getting out these wooden masks, as if the priestess had made them do an arts and craft lesson beforehand. They were really interesting to look at. Each one was different. Now, I tried to look online for what these looked the closest to, and I found that they looked very similar to these old shamanic masks, which you can see on the screen. It was fairly clear to me that the priestess was doing a lesson on the ego. That's my guess anyway. You can take your own guess at what I'm going to describe. For me, the mask was symbolic for what kind of ego or facade we all live behind. So yeah, as everyone was taking out their masks, they were showing each other. They were very excited, very proud of what they had made. I felt a little left out because I was empty-handed and didn't have one to show off, but it was fine. I was happy watching. Now, once the priestess had everyone's attention again, she began one by one taking someone's mask, inspected it, and then used what I'll describe as a magic pen, which she simply tapped on the mask, and the mask would slowly turn into gold, turning it from this rugged, imperfect wooden mask to a perfectly splendorous and shining golden mask. She did this to everyone's mask one by one. When she got to one woman, this woman became distressed and was almost crying, saying, "I don't want my mask turning into gold, please." But the priestess just calmly took it from her anyway, and she said in a profound and slow way, whilst looking into her eyes, "This is necessary." And she turned her mask into gold, and the woman took the mask back, just silent and staring at her new and improved mask. Now, at this point, the previously excited atmosphere had mysteriously shifted, and there was silence as everyone looked on in awe at what the priestess was doing. There seemed to be a shift in consciousness, and I sensed that there was definitely some kind of subconscious learning that was taking place. As the priestess continued to each person, eventually she came to me. I felt a bit awkward because I didn't have a mask, but instead she approached me and smiled and gently held up my wrist, revealing a bracelet with a crucifix pendant on it. And she turned the pendant into gold. I was quite surprised, and she just smiled. I said thank you. I didn't really know what to make of it, to be honest. I was in awe, like everyone else. I don't exactly know what was meant by the gold. It sounds as if the teaching was to imply that we must work on or perfect our egos, our masks that we live behind. We have to polish or improve our personality or psychological state. That's my guess, because for me, when I first started working on my ego and meditation, the ego isn't something that you can just get rid of or destroy immediately. You have to start by developing certain good habits, being polite, being good to others, so that you start having a better sense of self, etc. So yeah, that's my guess at the teaching. And I suspect that there are deeper symbolisms. So if any of you have an interpretation of what this symbolic teaching meant, I'd be very grateful to have your insights too. So please do comment below if you have any ideas. Now, what happened next, I suspect, happened differently for everyone else in the room. The priestess went back to the stage and she began to shapeshift. Everyone must have seen a different thing because what I saw was quite personal to me. When I was younger, maybe around 8 years old, I had an extremely vivid dream, or nightmare, should I call it, that has always stayed in the back of my mind my entire life. So in the dream as a child, I opened my bedroom door and a huge, fat samurai in full black armor with a mask was stood there. It had this menacing and powerful presence. It gave me such a fright as a child, and I ran from it. It didn't matter how far I ran. Every time I turned around to check if I lost it, it was still there. My entire life, I always wondered if it was a positive or negative being, because even though I was scared as a child, it was actually quite a calm being, which actually never attacked me or threatened me in any way. So, here I am, 20 years later in the astral, watching on in awe at this priestess turning into this huge samurai being, which was extremely similar to the samurai that was in my dreams as a child. And what's more is that it somehow relates to her teaching about masks, because the samurai was wearing a mask in my dream as a child and here. So I looked everywhere online for a picture to best show you what I mean by this samurai. So I'll put that on the screen now. This was really the most similar one I could find. I don't know anything about samurais, and I couldn't find much about them in terms of spirituality. So if any of you have any knowledge or wisdom about the spiritual significance of samurais, I'd be really grateful if you could share that with me in the comments below too. But yeah, while watching this priestess, I think I realized that perhaps this samurai wasn't actually a bad thing. It was perhaps a sign in the future that I would take an interest in astral projection and the ego and things like that, maybe. I don't know. I'm very much into the idea of us taking a spiritual warrior kind of attitude and approach towards astral projection, because you need courage and willpower to do these sorts of practices, to go into the astral, to overcome yourself, overcome your fears and desires. So perhaps it's related to that, I'm not sure. So yeah, I was pretty speechless at this point. I didn't know what to make of what was happening, and everyone else in the room was even more silent now too. Nonetheless, I liked her style of teaching. She didn't just talk and say words. She knew these people were not self-aware. And so she did activities with them and showed them things in order to make impressions on their subconscious in hopes that it would or should affect their consciousness overall in some way. So after she did this shape-shifting display, someone new came through the big doorway that I had entered through too. And I was very surprised to see someone I knew. And it was one of the least people I expected to be in a place like this. I didn't know her that well. She was more of an acquaintance, an old colleague at a place I used to work at. So she came into the temple with this gleaming smile and happiness on her face that I had actually never seen before in the physical. Keep in mind, I worked with her for about 3 years. She started clapping her hands and shouting, saying, "Wow, this is amazing, thank you. I'm so excited to be here." Everyone responded, cheering for her, clearly happy for her too. This is a woman in her 60s, I think, who barely expressed herself like this in the physical. She's usually very dreary and sad I often felt sorry for her because there was always something she was upset about or involved with some drama, and also the other colleagues were a bit mean to her. People gossiped about her, stuff like that. So, yeah, I was happy to see her like this too, but I was more surprised, if anything. So, as she's shouting, celebrating with happiness, the priestess walks over to her, puts her arm around her shoulder, and calms her down, and she says, "Yes, yes, but you must wait. The path isn't easy. We first have to accept our suffering before going forward. You have to accept and work through your suffering." I couldn't have thought of anything better to say to this woman who I knew had been going through a lot of suffering herself and had a hard time dealing with it. And with that, I woke up. And of course, I quickly wrote down the entire experience. A big thing I got from this experience was that the way we're influenced at night is not so much by intellectual ideas or conversations, but ultimately through our feelings. Things that can spur on an emotional response is usually more influential. So I can see how these influential experiences out of the body at night, whether conscious or not, can have an effect on our spiritual growth and even perhaps on the decisions that we make when we wake up. You often hear of people just waking up one day and making a spontaneous decision or coming to a realization that perhaps they finally want to do what they've been wanting to do for a while. Or perhaps they realize they want to end a certain relationship or change their job or move countries, etc. We're not conscious of it, but I suspect that we can be heavily influenced while we're asleep. This is just one reason why astral projection is a great thing to practice. Some people ask me, is astral projection dangerous? Can someone take over your body? Maybe I shouldn't do it. And I'm like, well, you leave the body every night anyway. Wouldn't you rather know what you're up to than not at all? Wouldn't it be safer to be conscious of your experience at night so that you can understand the possible influences and what your consciousness activity is up to while you're asleep? Do you sometimes wake up with moods, or you wake up extremely happy and you don't know why? Wouldn't you like to know why? We all dream every night, but we're just not aware of them. Alright, well, if you enjoyed this video and would like to hear more experiences like this, please leave a like, subscribe, click the bell button so you know when I upload a new video, and if you'd like to support the channel, there's a link for the Patreon in the description below. Thank you for listening, and stay conscious and lucid, as you might just find yourself in a classroom of your own one day.